Bolivia entered a state of emergency this Saturday, June 20, 2026, after 50 days of blockades. While groups linked to the old political machine of Evo Morales insist on keeping up the pressure in the streets even after a partial agreement with the Bolivian Workers' Central.
I instructed the Bolivian police and the armed forces to carry out the necessary actions to restore free movement, reopen the roads, and ensure the safety of the population. To those who are still maintaining the blockade, I say very clearly there is still time to give up voluntarily. Now is the moment. If you have legitimate demands, the doors to dialogue will remain open as they have been since the very first day. But those who persist in blocking, destroying, attacking, intimidating other Bolivians, or challenging the constitutional order will have to face the legal consequences of their actions. All the force of the law will be applied to violent individuals, to the fullest extent all the legitimate force that the Constitution and democracy grant the state to protect its citizens. And I want to ask the Bolivian people to follow and support the work of our armed forces, of our Bolivian police, in reopening the roads, protecting the population, and restoring normality, thus seeking security and peace. We do this for Bolivia, we do this for all Bolivian families.
The government states that the emergency was not declared to take away rights, but to restore the freedom of those who need to work, study, get around, and bring food home. That's where the Bolivian crisis exposes a well-known trait of the radical left in Latin America. When it loses control, it tries to block the roads, paralyze the economy, and use the suffering of the people as a political weapon. Rodrigo Paz decided to use the state to dismantle the blockades and prevent small groups from holding an entire nation hostage. Who benefits from closed roads? Why does the left use a crisis as blackmail? How does a nation reach the point where it needs a state of emergency to guarantee food, medicine, and fuel? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward, no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. The state of emergency was declared by Rodrigo Paz throughout the entire Bolivian territory after the blockades stopped being just protests and started affecting people's real lives. The measure took effect immediately and paved the way for the use of the armed forces to clear the highways. The president's reasoning was clear. Bolivia cannot remain hostage to groups that block roads, prevent the transport of goods, and turn political disputes into shortages. The intervention occurred because negotiation was no longer effective and followed open talks at the government palace. Rural sectors aligned with Evo Morales maintained roadblocks, mainly in areas connected to Cochabamba and the production corridor that supplies important regions of the nation. The blockade started during a severe economic crisis. The Paz government cut fuel subsidies in an attempt to reduce the deficit and address the shortage of dollars, while trying to reorganize public finances. The reaction grew quickly. Unions, peasant groups, teachers, miners, and activists linked to the humorism movement began to demand adjustments, an end to shortages, reversal of economic measures, and even the resignation of the president. Truck drivers stopped working, cargo didn't arrive, food prices went up, gas stations were under pressure, and hospitals started facing shortages of medicine. In La Paz, the impact was felt in restaurants, supermarkets, and health services. The strain persisted. It stopped being an ideological debate and became a daily fear. Evo Morales appears at the center of this crisis as the figure who still mobilizes part of the Bolivian left. Even away from power, he maintains influence in rural areas, especially in Chapare, and acknowledged frequent contact with protest leaders. Morales denies organizing the crisis and portrays the blockades as a popular economic response. But the practical effect was different, an entire nation paying the price for a power struggle. The former president also supports early elections and tries to get back into the political game while his allies keep up the pressure against Rodrigo Paz. For the government, this movement has the scent of organized destabilization. Rodrigo Paz tried to find a political solution before declaring an emergency. On Friday, the government reached an agreement with the Bolivian Workers' Central, COBE, the country's main labor federation. The agreement was presented as a step to reduce tension and pacify part of the mobilizations. The president spoke of hope for the Bolivian people and argued that everyone should take part in rebuilding stability. Mario Argolo, leader of Kobe, also treated the agreement as an opening to break the deadlock, but the agreement did not reach all groups. Rural associations close to Morales were left out of the negotiations and decided to maintain blockades. The emergency also came after weeks of clear signs of collapse. The Ombudsman's office recorded at least 14 deaths linked to the scenario of blockades and displacement crisis, including people who couldn't reach medical care and transportation workers affected during the strike. When the ambulance can't get through, when the medicine doesn't arrive, and when the food truck gets stuck, the blockade stops being a normal protest and becomes an attack on the daily life of people who have nothing to do with the fight for power. The presence of police and military is meant to prepare to reopen the routes and prevent these pressure points from continuing to strangle the economy. Bolivia is already experiencing a tense environment with inflation, a shortage of dollars, union disputes, and pressure from social groups. But the government reached its limit when partial negotiations were not enough and the blockades continued. In practice, Paz chose to act because the cost of omission became greater. Leaving roads closed for a longer time would mean accepting that an organized minority controls the supply for the majority. The Bolivian crisis also serves as a warning for Brazil. The method is well known: create pressure in the streets, turn economic issues into political warfare, attack the government from all sides, and use unions and movements as a blocking force. The difference is that in Bolivia, the result appeared in a much harsher way: state of emergency, shortages, and fear in the cities. Rodrigo Paz has been in office for only a few months and faces the challenge of breaking with almost 2 decades of leftist rule linked to the movement and socialism. The reaction against his government shows how political transition in Bolivia is not simple. The structure left by the socialist movement still has strength in the streets, in social organizations, and in the unions. When this group senses a loss of influence, it tries to show that it can still bring things to a halt. The state of emergency arises precisely from this clash between a government trying to regain control and a left that refuses to lose its ability to exert pressure through the power of blockades. There is a fragmented political struggle, with each group trying to extract concessions while the population pays the price. The Bolivian left tried to treat the blockade as legitimate pressure, but reality showed something else. When the blockade prevents a nation from breathing, the government needs to act. And that's what Rodrigo Paz did when he declared a state of emergency after 50 days of strain, lines, and fear. I'm Milson Alves, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.